Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This week, Louise Bodt joins John, Shannon, Amanda, and myself to discuss the European Starling. Starlings are another introduced species in the U.S. and have spread like wildfire across the country over the last 100+ years. We talk about these birds and whether or not they are a pest, as well as dispel the myth that they were introduced because of Shakespeare. We also are trying something new at the end of the episode. We're doing our own bracket and vote on different birds that we've done episodes on before. We're calling it our round robin tournament, and we'll ask you, our listeners, to participate as well. We have a ton of fun and couldn't stop laughing in our vote, so make sure you stick around to the end of the episode for more info on our round robin tournament. Okay, go grab your binoculars and let's get started. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. This is RJ and Amanda, John and Shannon. We have Louise with us again, and today we're talking about the European Starling, which is another introduced species, and Louise has studied the starling as well. So I don't know who wants to kick it off talking about the starling.
How did you start studying starlings, Louise? Tell everybody.
So when I was in my master's program, at the same time that I was starting, I was also an educator at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and I had heard about one of the other educators and researchers there was working on this starling project and sort of getting it off the ground, and it was all sparked from her observations of the starlings around the Museum of Natural History. And so I'll just give another shout out to Julia Zacchello, who really started this project and started to wonder, how much had been really looked into about the starlings in New York and in the U.S. And so I was figuring out what I wanted to research for my master's, and I ended up talking to her about this starling project, and it actually ended up being a really good fit because I was interested in getting into some population genetics, and I was interested in birds, and so it worked out. And so from there, it kind of really quickly escalated my interest in introduced species in general, because as Shannon started to talk about last episode, they really are these unintentional experiments that, humans shouldn't be moving stuff around because that can have consequences, but they already did it, right? It already happened, but maybe we can learn something, especially when they've been repeated in multiple different places. So I got really into that idea. And so it just started with starlings, which happened to be a really interesting, intelligent, and fierce bird. Hated by all, loved by a few of us.
Yeah, lots of farmers and ranchers do not like starlings. Lots of people who are into bird conservation don't like them either because of the competitive nature for nest holes. It's what people hypothesize. Although some of this stuff I think is done without enough data to justify the hate. And if you take aside that hate and you look at them, they are unbelievably pretty. They have all kinds of iridescence on them. They have little spots on their feathers. They have bright yellow bills. They're super smart. They mimic things. In fact, not too long ago, I thought there was a killdeer in my backyard. And because I'm deaf in my right ear, I kept spinning around trying to find the killdeer, and I couldn't find the killdeer. And then all of a sudden, there's a starling there. It's like it's mocking me as I'm standing there looking for a killdeer in my yard. And they're incredible. A lot of people keep them as pets as well, and they have some weird things that happen to them when they're in captivity. They'll start imitating you, almost like parrots do.
Really?
They're very, very good mimics. And their beaks go all kinds of wonky strange when they're in captivity. I guess they're not wearing them down in the same way that they would out in nature. So if you look at pictures online, you'll see all kinds of mangled-looking, weird, strange beaks, super long. They get curved.
Oh, strange.
Yeah, but you should look at them objectively up close and realize just how amazing their feathers are and how many different ways they must make color into their feathers.
And the one here, this Sternus vulgaris is the scientific name. So vulgaris is clearly, it had a reputation for a long time.
No, it's not. Vulgaris doesn't mean vulgar.
Okay.
It means common.
All right, well, there we go. Yeah, well, that's
Because it
vulgar.
seems rude to call it vulgaris. When they described it, it wasn't introduced all over here, people hating it. But yeah, so it means common.
No, that's that's a good point, and it's part of a big family, which is entirely Old World. So there were no members of the family Sternidae, which the starlings belong to, in the New World until European starlings were introduced and have spread all the way across North America. And the family itself actually has a lot of really spectacularly beautiful, colorful birds. And as beautiful as these things are, they don't get the respect they deserve at some level, in part because they're not as colorful as some of their relatives in the Old World.
They are if you put binoculars on them, though. Or if you see them in the hand in the museum, you look at them and they're amazing.
Or if the sun hits it right too. There's been times where I've seen it where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a starling. Like, I don't know. They are really pretty.
There's iridescence. There's this neat thing where when they molt, their feathers are completely black, and then these tips wear away, and they get this spotted aspect to them over time. They're neat. And again, they're, as Shannon was saying, they're very smart. Shannon's fond of saying, maybe one of the reasons why they're so successful, why they've been able to spread across basically every habitat in in North America, is that maybe they're literally willing to take chances that other birds aren't. And
that chance is living with humans. We were just talking about this in the museum before coming over, is living with deciding that you're going to make a living near humans and off of the things that humans do and waste and use. That's a pretty risky thing. Not so much wildlife has fared well in their interactions with humans. So if you're not pretty resilient, pretty smart, and pretty flexible, you're not going to take that chance to be around humans. So I don't know. They might be a lot smarter. Do we know anything about their brains?
I bet somebody does, but I don't really.
I should have looked. I don't know either. I should have looked that up. I don't know.
I mean, one of the things they're super famous for is these giant flocks that form in the non-breeding season that they call murmurations. And if you go online and look at some of those, one of the incredible things is how they're able to essentially, like a school of fish, just change direction and synchrony, and just in sometimes flocks of several thousand.
I mean, they're art in motion when you see that. And you can forget about their introductions. But I've never seen anything like a murmuration of starlings. And okay, if you had a superpower, what would it be? RJ, what would you want? You could be anything.
I think it would be flying. Yeah.
Me too. Flying.
Teleportation.
Oh, good idea.
That's a good one.
I want to switch.
Flying.
Yeah.
Absolutely flying.
For me, it's flying.
Yeah.
Every time I see them do that, I think,
Awesome.
why can't I need to do that? Why can't I do that? In fact, I'm just convinced I just haven't tried it. That's why I don't fly.
Don't try it.
My question is, why doesn't Fred run into Joe next to him when they start making moves?
Yeah, how do they know?
But they do coordinate with the ones next to them. But it's exactly like how a school of fish coordinates, because they're paying attention to just the ones that are next to them, right? And then it becomes like this very fluid.
So there's no leader the way there isn't a geese flying with one in the middle. As a leader. That's not how these murmurations work. And there can be hundreds of thousands of birds in these murmurations. Gosh. It is, and they just it's like they're dancing in the sky.
Yeah.
I always tell this story. I was doing some work along the Colorado River one time, and I came up over this little ridge, and there was a big backwater, and it was filled with double-crested cormorants. And there were about 50 of them, and 49 of them went one way to get off the water, and one of them came back the other way. And I'll never forget that as this one got off the water, the other 49 came through, and they just hit it, and it just dropped into the water.
No.
And where I'm going is with this is, like, again, I've never seen starlings make mistakes like that in these big flocks. And so it's an incredible evolutionary thing to have achieved that.
So I guess there's safety in numbers. It's hard for you to be singled out as an individual by a hawk or some other kind of predator if there's, 20,000 of you flying around. And so, but to be so perfectly choreographed is really amazing. And they all roost together at certain times of the year in the winters. Fall and winter, they'll roost together. And so they fill trees. It's really incredible. And, something will cause one to move, and all it takes is one to move, and then they're all, going in the sky. It's really...
That's awesome.
And I didn't know this either, but apparently they're pretty fierce in how they fight, like to the death with their feet.
Oh, wow.
So
their feet?
They are fierce. They are survivors.
Who do they fight with each other or with other birds? Or
They also kill other birds.
Oh, they do?
Yeah. That's part of the reason people hate them so much.
Okay.
But I think you sort of got at this a little bit, but the whole cavity nesting competition situation, starlings will kill other birds and take over their nests.
Oh, okay. That's not good.
No, it's not great. But
Well, and again, what's amazing to me was when I was doing my master's degree on the Gulf of California, I was working out in these deserts that were 40 kilometers from any kind of big riparian areas, and there would be starlings nesting in the columnar cactus along the shores of the Gulf of California. So they're just incredibly adaptable to different types of situations. And as long as they can find a nest site, they'll use it and be successful.
So how were they introduced to the U.S. then? Like, how did they first get here?
So they first got here in 1890 when there was a group called the American Acclimatization Society. Very common practice at the time. Again, people from Europe, people from the UK, wanting to have some of the birds from Europe where they lived now, in this case, New York. And so this Acclimatization Society decided to bring several species, but one of them was the starling. And they were released in Central Park in 1890 and 1891. It was about 120 birds total, and the rest is history, really.
Yeah.
I think there were a few other possible introductions, but that's the main one. That's the one that radiated throughout.
If I had to bet, I'd bet they did not have a lag time the way other introduced tags did they?
So they were introduced to New York in 1890, and by 1920 they were throughout the Northeast. Wow. By 1970 they reached all the way to Alaska. Wow. So
I mean,
maybe a short lag.
That's amazing.
I mean, their population, and it corresponds in their native range. The population numbers are actually going down. And I don't think it's necessarily clear exactly what's going on in large parts of Europe with respect to that. But clearly in the U.S., they've expanded just dramatically and really been successful. And again, you can see them in cities, but you can also see them in farms. I mean, they're in ranches. I mean, they can live in lots of different places.
And following up on something you said, Shannon, why do ranchers and farmers dislike them?
Well, I didn't know until relatively recently when Louise invited her master's advisor to a lab group meeting we had, and we read one of her fascinating recent papers on these birds. So there's a lot of variation in measurements in these birds. Well, okay, you can know that, you can look at them and see that, but what's happening is where there's feed at in these ranches and other places, the starling's beaks are getting longer, and the ranchers hate them because they're pulling corn and other things out of the things that they're trying to feed their livestock.
Wait, so they're adapting to be able to just steal feed?
Yeah, the data seem to suggest their beaks are getting longer in a very short period of time, right? These things haven't been around for very long. So that they can reach further into the, I don't know, what are the things called?
The feed bins.
Yeah.
And the numbers that the USDA estimates in terms of loss are, like, I want to say in the millions of dollars a year.
Wow.
So that when Julie started doing these projects, the USDA was really interested because they get a lot of complaints from farmers about how to control the populations and what they can do to keep them from eating all the grain like that.
Wow. I mean, think about a bird having that much change in their beak and adapting to a new food source. This is not something they have historically been at, and they don't eat these things in their native range. And they're over just 20 generations, their beaks are changing to, that's incredibly short periods of evolutionary time for there to be change like that. So there's another thing that you can get. They're almost like bacteria in that for birds, in that there's a lot of things you can study with bacteria that you can't study with other things because they reproduce quickly, so you can get a lot of generations fast. Humans may be fairly long-lived, but we're not in an evolutionary sense long-lived enough to see evolution in action. And, and starlings provide that really good evidence of evolution in action over short periods of time frames. So, when you know that, maybe you can start understanding why they're so successful or what it is. They also, apparently, they carry a lot of parasites as well, which I find really interesting, because I also think there's no introduced bird that doesn't have some form of a superior immune system, because you take them from where they're adapted and you put them somewhere else. Well, all of this stuff is different. Everything in their microbiome is different. Their food is different. They're exposed to different insects that could carry different kinds of parasites and pathogens. I mean, the whole thing. So you're not going to have a crappy immune system and survive long-term those kinds of environmental changes. So that's another opportunity you have to study with European goldfinches.
And I just wanted to give a shout out with respect to this research because it really highlights the work that people like Dave Willard and our predecessors at the Field Museum have done in terms of building the collections there, because what they did was they went into collections and looked at the change over time in North American introduced populations. And the Field Museum had some of the best series of birds from decades ago. So, that's, again, one of the kinds of things you can see with modern collections.
We have 1,186 starlings. Wow. So that's a lot a lot of study material for anyone.
And do you know dating back to when?
I didn't. I should have looked that up. I don't know. And I don't know if if they were part of trades early on.
I think that probably, we would have European birds that would go back to the early, to the late 1800s. But I'll bet we don't have a whole lot of North American birds from that early period.
So I think that they were in Chicago by around 1930. So maybe we would start to have some from that time.
But that's one of the reasons why you have collections, is to be able to monitor this change over time in these situations. And this is just an absolutely stunning example of a really significant change in morphology in this bill length.
Yeah, and is it accompanied by genetic changes? We don't know yet, but the birds themselves, there's almost no population structuring in starlings. So you couldn't take a starling from one place and another starling from a different place, genotype them, and know where they were from, not with any statistical certainty, because there is variation, but not very much of it, and it's not structured across geography, which kind of makes sense for something that has exploded across the landscape to that number. Imagine what it would take to get geographic isolation and therefore differentiation in something that has that many individuals. It would have to be a pretty big barrier to gene flow. And a normal river or a mountain's not going to do it because they got all the way to Alaska in a pretty short period of time. So I don't know.
Not only that, but they're unpredictable in terms of migration. So individuals from the same nest, one sibling could migrate and the other one couldn't. And then some years they migrate and some years they don't as an individual. And so that also means that they're not moving around in any sort of consistent patterns within the U.S. So that could also contribute to just having a lot of gene flow.
Well, they also, there's a lot of cheating that goes on too. So you don't know that the birds that are having different migratory patterns had different fathers. Oh. That could be the case. So yeah. They're amazing. As long as I'm not a cow rancher. I think they're okay. But I don't like them on my feeder so much.
And I just want to, you mean like cheating, like they're not monogamous?
Yes.
Like, okay.
So the social father at a nest is not always the biological father.
As in probably, I don't know what the actual data are. For a lot of passerine birds, that can be up to 40% of the offspring in a given nest are not sired by the father.
Wow.
Louise, do you like studying European goldfinches more or starlings?
Oh, I love all my birds equally.
I feel like she's in a pageant.
No, I think that the starlings provide a really, really incredible opportunity because they are so widespread in the U.S. But I love studying the goldfinches because they're new and we don't know where they're going. And I think in conjunction, having multiple systems where you can study introductions over time throughout the evolutionary tree of birds, I think that's important. So I had fun in my master's and I love starlings, but I'm excited that I'm doing goldfinches now too.
That's
nice.
awesome.
To me, they're like the little bird that could.
Yeah.
In large numbers.
Yeah.
In murmurations.
No, they're not going to murmur. No. I would bet large sums of money that we don't have on that we're going to put in our bathroom on that.
All right. Well, is there anything else? Did you have something?
Oh, sorry.
Amanda?
I was just going to say, so I'm thinking like all the birds that are in the U.S., you were saying there was probably other introductions, but all the birds that are in the U.S. today came from like the 120 in New York and then the other small introductions, right?
So the ones that are in the U.S. today almost certainly all came from the 120 introduced in New York.
Okay.
I think there were other small pockets where people tried to introduce them. This happened a lot in the 1800s, and not all of them always survived, right? Because it could have been a very small number of them, and they didn't reproduce, and so they just went away.
Okay.
But yeah, I think there may have been a few other introductions in random places, but yeah, that 120 is like...
One thing that we talked about with European goldfinches, which is true for European starlings too, is that the colonial aspect of where they were introduced is very similar. In other words, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina,
South America.
Yeah. Yeah.
South Africa.
South Africa.
Yeah.
Is that does that 120 provide enough genetic variation for them to be? I mean, because they're so successful, I guess so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
120 is actually a lot. I mean, I know populations with that little are obviously very vulnerable and perhaps on their way to extinction and would certainly be called endangered. But from a genetic perspective, 120 is pretty good.
Okay.
And I mean, one of the things Louise doesn't know about her goldfinches that she'll eventually find out is where the source of all of these birds are. And there it looks like there's enough genetic variability and differentiation to kind of pinpoint where the birds came from, because you can't tell necessarily by looking at them where they came from, but their genes will give them away.
Yeah, and with starlings, as we've been talking about, one of the things is that 120 turned into 500, turned into 1,000 really quickly. And so the other way you lose genetic variation is by maintaining a population at the size of, say, 120 for a long period of time. And starlings clearly didn't do that in North America.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're getting close on time. Is there anything else starling related we want to talk about before we wrap it up?
I feel it is my duty to continue to dispel a myth that is fun, but is not true, which is that the original introduction was because of Shakespeare.
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought that was real.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, it's a really fun story, and I think we should keep saying it out of fun, but recognize that you can say, like, yeah, it's a fun idea. This guy wanted all the birds from Shakespeare's plays to be in Central Park. But in reality, there is not actually any evidence that is true. And a lot of people have been digging into it over time and have not found any evidence. However, the fun fact being starling is mentioned just once throughout Shakespeare's entire work, and it's in Henry IV, Part 1. And the reference to the starling is a line that comments on the starling's mimicry. So I'll just read it. "Nay, I'll have a starling shall be taught to speak nothing but Mortimer." So he's saying he'll have a starling that's just going to say the same word over and over again. And so they even knew, back in Shakespeare's time, that starlings were mimicking, making fun sounds. So I always think that's kind of a fun tidbit. But
That's
is
awesome.
And if you
That is
go
awesome.
outside at certain times of the year, starlings remember what birds are where, and you cannot know for sure that the sound that you hear is coming from the bird you think it is and not from a starling.
Wow.
So they will sing right before the bird you're waiting for, right before those warblers come or whatever, they will start singing.
Wow.
Why do they do that? Like, to
'cause they
mess with
can.
us? Just because they can.
Why do I want to fly? I can't. I desperately want to fly.
You'll see them sitting in flocks of 50 to 100 in trees sometimes, and they'll just be. It's almost like they're practicing. But then when they literally, you also see situations, males are really kind of fun to watch when they're singing to try to attract females because they do this little weird rotation of their wings while they're doing it. It's really kind of a bizarre little behavior. But, it's eventually to attract females. And so I don't know how much work's been done on vocal repertoire relative to female choice in something like starlings, which would be really interesting to know.
That's so cool. Very cool.
Well, do you guys want to try our game that we were talking about? Our vote?
Round robin.
Okay, so we're going to try something new. We'll see how it goes, whether or not this makes it or not. But Shannon sent over that there was I think Ducks Unlimited did like a Marsh Madness. So we're going to do our own Birds of a Feather bracket. And it's a round robin tournament because we like puns.
Well done.
So what we're going to do is we're going to vote on just like our favorite birds from episodes that we've done on one half. And this is all subjective. And I know that it's like just our favorites.
But we will judge each other.
We will.
accordingly.
And then the other half we're going to post on our social and let our listeners vote. And then we'll kind of get into like a Final Four thing.
Sweet.
So this might not even time out correctly with March Madness, but I think it'll be some fun discussion. And if it's not, then we tried. But so for this first round, so I just kind of put each of our episodes in order, and then we put different birds up against each other in a bracket. So the first round, we're going to start with the ivory-billed woodpecker against, we did an episode on birds of paradise, which I know we're grouping a ton of birds together in that. But so for ivory-billed woodpecker versus birds of paradise, what's our vote?
Birds of paradise.
I knew you would
Every
say
day
that.
and twice on Sundays.
I know.
Birds of paradise.
Yes.
yeah,
You too.
definitely.
Me too.
I know. I didn't even have to ask, but
I knew Shannon was.
I think being extinct is a problem.
yeah. All right. So the next matchup is the American woodcock against the sandhill cranes.
Oh,
that's hard.
That's tough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this one stumped me when you told us we were going to do it.
They're both great dancers.
See, I
Yeah.
tend to look at it from the perspective of who I think would win in a fight.
Oh,
I'm going with
Seemed like a
Sandhill
fair
Crane.
Sandhill cranes.
We didn't know that was the criteria.
I just came up with that. I'm sticking with it.
I like both, but I love the displays of woodcocks, and so I'm going to pick a woodcock.
Yeah, that's a really hard choice, but I think I would have to go woodcock also.
me too.
Yeah, I'm going woodcock also.
Sorry, John.
You were
We'll see you at the bar. my crane versus your woodcock.
Okay, next matchup is frigate bird against purple martin.
Oh, this is impossible.
Do I need to?
Yeah.
I'll just say it. Frigate bird.
With the fight theory.
We know John's
yes.
criteria now.
Yes, there we go.
Now there's silence because I couldn't decide before, and I got advance warning we were going to do this. This is where I got stumped. I'm going to go with purple martins.
Okay.
That was my gut, yeah, to go purple martins. I mean, I get to see them around here, so.
That's how I feel, Louise. I'm definitely purple martin.
Okay, I'm going frigate bird, but my vote doesn't matter. The purple martin won that round, it sounds like.
All right.
They're iridescent blue.
Yes.
It doesn't.
They're
so
awesome.
Cool. Yeah.
So the next matchup is the great horned owl versus the northern cardinal.
Oh, okay.
John.
Great horned owl.
This time I'm going with the dominant great horned owl.
Okay.
A cardinal bit me in between when I
personal
was
for
in
Shannon.
between my thumb and my forefinger. The hardest thing I've ever felt, and I couldn't get it to release. And since then, I've had an anti-cardinal bias.
That's valid. Yeah.
Yeah, cardinals can be interesting to deal with, but I'd have to go with the great horned owl as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I go with the cardinal.
I'm
But...
going great horned owl.
Okay.
I'm not sure Amanda isn't right that a cardinal couldn't, but and from my perspective, a cardinal
Take a-
couldn't beat off a great horned owl that grabbed it in the wrong way. It would
right.
certainly get bit.
That's right, John.
All right, the next matchup is oilbirds versus roseate spoonbills.
Oh, you challenged me. I'm not picking because oil birds are super cool, but roseate spoonbills are pink. So
Yeah.
Oh.
Say that.
Yes, it's a pink.
So I might have to go with the pink, but it's a hard thing. So I'm going to go with spoonbills. Actually, I'll go with spoonbills because one of the most amazing memories I have of going to Louisiana was seeing an entire tree that was full of giant pink birds. The whole tree was pink. I didn't even know they existed before that, and it was awesome. So
It's a
roseate
good
spoonbills.
point. I'm going to go with the ability to echolocate and say oilbirds.
Oh.
I think I'd have to go spoonbill.
Oh.
Me too, spoonbill.
Okay, I'm going spoonbill also.
Echolocation is very cool.
That
Though.
is very
cool.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't squeeze roseate spoonbill babies for oil. So oil birds are cool.
Yes, yeah, they are.
I hate to make any of these get personal, but this next one's killdeer versus the Willard Sooty Boo Boo.
Oh, John.
Willard City Boo Boo.
Yeah, it's got to be the boo-boo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going that
I'm
one
going
too.
boo-boo.
Yeah.
I'll make it unanimous.
All right. And then we've just got two more matchups left. So the next one is the ring-billed gull versus vampire finches.
Vampire finches.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Ring-billed gull.
Oh, get out of here.
I'm
No
going with the
way.
gull, too.
My
I like the
vampire
ones against
finch is pecking on your ring-billed gull. and
Your
sucking
vampire,
its
your
blood
vampire
out.
finch isn't a species.
You're the tiebreaker.
Oh, okay. I'm going vampire finches.
Okay.
All right. And then the last matchup for today is oxpeckers against the shoebill.
Oh.
Shoebill.
Yeah.
Shoebill.
Shoebill.
Okay.
All right.
Shoebill.
Poor oxpeckers.
There's nothing wrong with oxpeckers.
They got a bad draw.
Yeah.
That was a 116.
Yeah. It was a tough matchup. All right. So on social, there's some big matchups coming up. The Watson against the Puteki Teki, Mallard Duck versus Blue Jays, flame bowerbird versus limpkins. So we'll see what our listeners come up with.
Sweet. That's awesome.
All right, and I think that's it for the episode then.
All right. That was cool, RJ. That was a
All
good
right.
job.
Let's see if people respond.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It'll give them something to think about.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. We love all of you and can't thank you enough. All week we'll be posting matchups for you to vote on for our round robin tournament, and we'll be posting the results as well. This will all be happening on our Instagram, Birds of a Feather Podcast. Next week we'll release the next round of voting, and eventually we'll crown our champion. We're looking into getting stickers made of our winner for our voters, so stick around for more info on that. Thanks to Daniel, our audio engineer, as well as Earhole Studios in Chicago for helping us record. You all are the best. All right, see you all next week, everyone. Thanks.